Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Texas Public Policy Foundation's weekly live stream, where we cover the pressing issues of the day and often, as we will today, have the opportunity to interview some of the newsmakers, not just here in Texas where we're based, but from around the country, knowing that most of you are tuning in from outside the great state of Texas. Joining me this week is my good friend and, more importantly, Congressman of Texas's 36th House District, Brian Babin. Dr. Babin is a dentist by training. He is also a military veteran. He is terrific on every issue, and that includes especially the pressing issue of this spring, not just in Texas, but in the United States, and that is the border crisis. Dr. Brian Babin, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's great to be with you as always, Kevin. Really appreciate the great job you're doing with the wonderful Texas Public Policy Foundation. Y'all are doing so much good for this, for our great state and the country.
Well, thanks a lot for saying that, Congressman. We've had the opportunity to work with you and your great staff and office on how immigration has affected your district, northeast of Houston. Today, we're going to talk about immigration generally, but especially the border crisis that this country is undergoing. So, and I don't mean this in a partisan way, Brian, that here we have 100 days into the new presidential administration, the renewal of a problem that had been fixed by the previous administration. Whether a viewer is Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, the reality is the border had been fixed for all intents and purposes as recently as a year ago. And the current administration, I think, is really contributing mightily to the reigniting of illegal crossings. We're going to get into that today, but just want to start with the proverbial 30,000-foot question for you. What's the status of the border, not just in Texas, but all the way across the U.S.-Mexico border?
Well, as the co-chairman of the House Border Security Caucus, I've already led one delegation down there. A number of my colleagues, there were 13 of us, the Texas members of the U.S. House, went down there about 3 weeks ago. I plan to take another group down there to help. We went to the Rio Grande sector for the one we did 3 weeks ago, and we have another group going towards the end of this month, going to El Paso. And I can tell you that this border is in worse shape than it ever has been. The numbers are staggering. The amount of money the American taxpayers are shelling out for the crisis on the border. The challenges that we're seeing down there are unprecedented in history, the worst that we have ever seen. We are hearing reports that the Biden administration, in fact, his chief of staff, Ron Klein, said that things are getting under control, and that nothing could be further from the truth than that statement. And I can just tell you that it is a crisis, an ongoing crisis, a worsening crisis. And also, I want to correct one thing you said, if you don't mind, Kevin. I actually I am one of the Houston congressmen. I represent the southeast portion of Harris County, southeast Houston, Baytown, that area, all the way over to Louisiana, from the Gulf of Mexico up to Jasper, Woodville, Livingston, and Newton. So we've got 9 counties. And even though we're several hundreds of miles from the southern border, we are like every other district in the state of Texas. We are impacted greatly by the crisis on the border. And let me just say this: every state is considered now a border state with the crisis that's ongoing.
Oh, that's well said, and certainly of all of the big cities in Texas, and I would argue in the country, Houston probably has had to deal with the biggest impact from immigration. So people are looking at their Texas map right now and trying to figure out how it is that Houston would be impacted by it in 2 ways. First of all, what you just said, that this crisis at the border is so significant that, heck, people in Minnesota are affected by this
Right.
immigration problem, to your point. But the second, getting specific about Houston and Harris County and that section of the big city that you represent on the east and southeast side, when you look at the local officials there, for all intents and purposes, they've really been complicit with President Biden and Vice President Harris on not observing the rule of law. And that's one of the reasons that big cities, a few hundred miles away from the border, are having to deal with this crisis. And so I really want to get into that for our viewers, Dr. Babin, in assessing what's going on at the border itself. And then secondly, how that's impacting places like Houston and even cities and counties farther into the interior. And finally, before we get to audience questions here in a little bit, what the situation is in DC that has really helped to contribute to this. So you've been to the border many times. You were there recently, a few weeks ago, leading some of your fellow Texas congressmen, delegation members from Texas. What did you see there? What did Border Patrol tell you? What did property owners tell you about what's going on at the border?
And I'm glad you mentioned property owners, because those are the very ones who are being so just badly impacted by this absolute crisis. We talk to stakeholders such as county sheriffs. We talk to policemen. We talk to some of the local elected officials as well. And I can tell you that it was worse than we anticipated. Because the mainstream media, let's face it, is not really reporting the truth about what is ongoing down there. And the administration under Biden simply has denied that there is a crisis ongoing. And when we got down there, of course, we all remember vividly the rhetoric coming from the left and the Democratic Party and the mainstream media during the Trump administration about kids in cages and the overwhelming problems and bedlam and chaos at the border during his administration. And what we saw down there, some of the CBP facilities were just mind blowing. It was the facility at Donna, Texas, for instance, run by the Customs and Border Protection agents, had a capacity in Donna for that facility of 250 individuals, unaccompanied minors. And there were over 5,000. There were 5,700 kids in that facility. As we speak, we have there's over 20,000 unaccompanied minors in custody, either in the Customs and Border Protection facilities or in HHS. And as a healthcare practitioner, I practiced dentistry for nearly 40 years. I can tell you that having some knowledge of the COVID pandemic and the virus, most children do not exhibit any manifestations, any symptoms of COVID. And the policy down there in the Donna facility was to only test for COVID those children who are exhibiting symptoms. Well, most kids, they may be carrying it and passing it along, but they don't have the symptoms. So they're not testing very many of them. And then so many of these individuals, and not only the kids, but the adults, are being released into the United States with COVID positive tests. And at a time when the Biden administration is still, forcing kids to stay home. 60% of children in this country haven't gone back to school. They're still having to mask, socially distance, and they're releasing COVID positive illegal immigrants at the border and to fan out across this country. So we saw things that were just hair raising. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, I tell you, just story after story, either by those of you in Congress who've been down to the border taking stock of the situation, or from the very few media outlets who actually cover this realistically, honestly. It's just gut-wrenching, not just from the standpoint of our own cities and counties in Texas in particular being affected by this, cities and counties in other states around the country, but also for the human beings who maybe with very good reason are trying to migrate to the United States. I think the point is, this is not how to run an immigration system. The very first thing we've got to do is make sure that we are protecting the border, not just for us, but also for them. To that point, Congressman Babin, I'm curious if you could provide some insight for our audience into what's going on in DC about this issue. We've talked about the Biden-Harris administration. I've argued that they've been asleep at the wheel, but it is probably more intentional than that. You can speak about that, but I'm also curious about what you're seeing either in the House or the Senate in DC regarding actions that may fix this.
Well, I think that most people are wondering why would the Biden administration do this if they're getting any of the truth at all? Because many of the major mainstream networks simply don't report what's going on down there. I think those of us who keep our ear to the ground, our biggest message, and I've said this numbers and numbers of times to my colleagues, to get the message out, we have to message the truth. And we cannot allow the American people to stay in ignorance because of the threat on the border from all aspects, whether it be public health, whether it be terrorism, because they're catching people that are on the terrorist watch list down there from over 100 different countries. We have to educate, we have to medicate these people. The promises that the Biden administration made, and before he even took office, were an encouragement to continue illegal immigration, and that's what's happened. We've got the Democrats. Let's go ahead and let it get out of the closet here, because the truth of the matter is they want these people to come in. They have the grand strategy, I think, of the Democratic Party, and we've known this, we've suspected it for years, but they would like to see a large portion of the American electorate replaced by illegal immigrants who then get enfranchised to cast votes. That's what HR 1, the first bill that Pelosi introduced to basically take over a federal takeover of our election process. They want these illegal immigrants to be voters. They know they will overwhelmingly be voting for Democrats. Everything these Democrats are trying to do, whether it's HR 1, HR 8, HR 6, the COVID bills, the relief bills, infrastructure packages, all are geared to empower and to empowerment and the control of our country's government by the Democratic Party. And immigration is one of the key cogs in that machine that they are trying to gain control of this country on a permanent basis. And you hate to say something like that, but it is absolutely true. There's no other explanation than that. For some of the inexplicable things that are happening on our border and the dangerous things, the sanctuary cities, the amount of money that we're spending. HHS is spending $60 million a week on their facilities. The one facility I mentioned in Donna that's run by the Customs and Border Protection Agency, that was $16 million a month for that little facility, which is supposed to have, like I said, 250 person capacity, and they had over 5,000 in there. They have individual pods that are supposed to have capacities of 30 to 35 individuals in there, and they've got 300, 400, 500 kids in there. And this is what it's all about. They know that DACA was a violation of the Constitution by President Obama, and this has gotten a hook. They've gotten a hook into a legitimacy, and they want to continue that. DACA was just about 800,000 individuals at one time, and with the incursion of these numbers of UACs coming in, unaccompanied children, they're going to have a DACA of millions of individuals. And this is the grand strategy. And this is what we're seeing in Washington, D.C. This is what the Democrats are trying to do in every bill that they introduce. And quite frankly, the Republicans are going to just have to weather the storm, try to get the truth out. And this is why I'm so proud of TPPF and what you're trying to do, Kevin, and get the message out to the American people that Joe Biden is creating a monster and blaming it on Trump and saying that he was cruel and inhumane to children. And on the contrary, what the Trump administration did was to control the border. We had and I say we, I'm a Republican, but I can tell you as a congressman, I can tell you very truthfully and matter of fact that the Trump administration had many, many great policies that they worked on for months and months when they had their challenge in 2019 and controlled that border and got it down to less than 25,000 per month, 15,000 per month. coming in, total. This is total, not UACs. But now we had 162,000, 175,000. We'll have 200,000 individuals, illegals coming across in very short order.
Well, it's true. Those numbers are really staggering. Just to put those in context and perspective for our audience, as you just mentioned, there are 172,000 illegal persons who crossed in March. I haven't seen the April numbers yet. I don't believe they've been released, at least as of a few minutes before.
They're similar.
They're similar okay.
Numbers, yes.
And history would show that as we get into May and June and July, those numbers will continue to increase. We've been estimating since January and February here that you could see 1 million to 2 million illegal aliens cross the border by Labor Day. And to put that in perspective, you just mentioned these numbers. The Trump administration, as of a year ago, had gotten those numbers to 15,000 a month. This is not merely incompetence. This is really politics. And that leads to the follow-up question, Dr. Babin, before we turn to the audience for some of their questions. And that is it really politics that explains why Vice President Harris, who for 40 days has been tasked with leading the border crisis task force, not having gone to the border at all?
She doesn't have any answers for this problem. She was given the role of czar of the border security of this country by President Biden. Quite frankly, my colleague Jody Arrington and I, who led the last delegation of Texas members down to the border, sent a letter to Vice President Harris, inviting her to meet us down there at least at some point on our itinerary, because we made the run down there through the Coast Guard, the DEA, Customs and Border Protection, Border Security, Border Patrol agents, sheriffs, all of the above. And we wanted Vice President Harris, if she's the czar of border security, should be there listening to people. And on the contrary, she is not. As you just said, it's been weeks and weeks and weeks. She's shown no inclination to come. In fact, when she was asked a couple of months ago whether she had a plan to go down to the border, she just simply cackled and laughed and said that she had no plans to come. And it's appalling to me that this administration would just so flippantly, just not call this the crisis that it is, not want to see what's going on, and on the contrary, to mislead the American people in telling us that the border's secure, that people were being turned back, that there is no chaos, no crisis on there. And not only have we seen the numbers of individuals coming across in staggering numbers, but we've seen the drugs. As I said, we visited with the Coast Guard, we visited with DEA. Fentanyl, probably the most dangerous illicit drug that the American public faces today, coming across a 233% increase since the Biden administration has taken over. 70-something thousand Americans die of overdoses each year. Fentanyl is one of the great culprits that causes this problem. And so human trafficking, sex trafficking, really indentured servitude. We've empowered the Biden administration has definitely empowered the cartels. They're making millions of dollars per day. Everybody that comes across that border pays. They're either paying the cartels or working for the cartels. If you don't pay the cartels and you come into the United States, you can wind up dead. We've seen that. We've seen things such as rape trees, dead bodies being found. Many of the sheriff's offices down there, deputies, ranchers, landowners have found dead people there, and many of them have been saved. As the Border Patrol is demonized by the left and they want to abolish ICE, we see on a daily basis, these heroes going out into the water in the Rio Grande, going out into the desert and saving children, women, and people who are destitute and lost. I just don't know how many more kids, little toddlers, 3 and 5-year-olds, that the Biden administration needs to see tossed over a 14-foot wall before they decide this is something they need to take care of and do it truthfully, and not just telling us that things are happening now to solve the border crisis. It's and when they say the numbers are going down, it's kind of like telling your kid to clean up his room and he just puts everything in the closet out of sight. We need to take care of this problem and keep the American people safe and sound. That's the biggest mandate that we have as elected officials.
Well, amen to that. And the way to get the Biden-Harris administration to actually address this issue is to ramp up public pressure. That's why we're continuing to talk about it every day. That's why you're doing that in your position. And of course, key to that are people like those who tune into this live stream. We're going to turn to them next, Dr. Babin, for a few questions from our audience. If you're in the audience and you have a question that you would like to pose, just go into the comment section of the channel where you're watching this, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. We'll start with the first question from the audience, Congressman Babin, and that is, in light of the inaction from the federal officials, what are some steps that states, especially the state of Texas, could take in order to address the border crisis?
That is an excellent question. A very good question, because as the administration has shown no inclination whatsoever to enforce federal law. And it's staggering to think about that. As the president of the United States, Biden raised his right hand, swore an oath to uphold the laws of the United States, and yet they're ignoring the laws. What can be done? Number one, as you just said, Kevin, we got to get the message out to the American people so they can bring pressure on their elected officials, especially those in the Democratic Party and in the administration, to keep us safe, to keep drugs out, to keep not only us safe, but the migrants themselves are encouraged and incentivized by their rhetoric to just continue coming. And then what can be done by the states? I think a lot more. I'm a dentist, I'm not an attorney, but I have talked to attorneys. I have talked to people who are professionals. I visited with Ken Cuccinelli, who's a Deputy Secretary of Department of Homeland Security under the Trump administration. He said the states have much more authority and power than people anticipate and really think. And I'm hoping, and he's also in conversations with the Attorney General of our great state, and also with our governor's office, so that they can do some things to turn some of these folks back, keep us safe. And we're being invaded. There's no question about it. There are people that are coming in. Many of them are looking for a better quality of life. Many are fleeing crime and what have you, but many of them have bad intentions for America. And in order to come here and seek asylum, you also have to have a valid asylum claim. And most of them, up to 90% of these asylum claims, are bogus and fictitious. And when they do go before an immigration court, most of those are turned down and rejected, and they're supposed to be deported. Well, all deportations have been ceased by the Biden administration, and the interior enforcement has been abolished. We're now letting them come in, and once they come in, they're going to be here to stay. And so the states can push back. We can station National Guard troops. We can station, in fact, our governors has sent a lot of our law enforcement down there. I've interviewed and talked and visited with a lot of these great men and women that are down there. I've ridden on their gunboats on the Rio Grande. They're doing a fantastic job, but we need to have teeth. And have teeth, we've got to be able to make arrests. We've got to be able to hold these people, and we've got to be able to have them deported or held until the federal government finally does their job and deports. We have over 1 million people that have already had their day in court, found to have bogus reasons for being here, and even have criminal activity or criminal records and convictions on their records. And they're supposed to be being deported, and the Biden administration simply will not do it. I think it's time for the states to take up the slack and start enforcing this.
Well, that's true. And the reality is, if states don't, especially if Texas doesn't, then we're going to have a crisis, the scale of which we can't even predict. And so that's why our foundation and I have been arguing now for a few weeks that we ought to take some of that so-called stimulus money, which I know you objected to, that Congress is foisting upon Texas and spend $5.5 billion of it to finish the border wall system. That's the kind of thing that could really help to secure the border and get us to the point where we can actually begin addressing the root cause of the crisis. And Congressman, that's the next question from one of our audience members. And this audience member asks, addressing the immediate crisis is important, but what long-term policy proposals might address the root cause of the crisis?
Well, the Trump administration had some great policies put in place. A lot of hard work, a lot of imagination and thinking and negotiations with Mexico, with the Northern Triangle countries, to put in policies such as the Migrant Protection Protocols or Remain in Mexico policy, the National Declaration of Emergency, interior enforcement, our Title 42 public health restrictions that were used so effectively to turn people back at the border because of the pandemic, the dangers of COVID. And those have all been shucked and not maybe some of them, like they're still utilizing some of the Title 42. But for the most part, they've shucked them all, and they need to re-implement this. And for goodness sakes, start building and complete this border wall. And I've also been on a letter, a signer of a letter to question and ask for an investigation of the Biden administration, because we feel like that he has violated the law. There's what we call the Impoundment Control Act, that monies and funding provided for border protection and walls and barriers. This has been earmarked. I hate to use the word earmarked, but this has been allocated by Congress to go to building a wall, the border protection on the border, and the Biden administration has completely ceased it. In fact, the very first day in office, he stopped the construction of the border wall with an executive order and put approximately 11,000 people, 6,000 or 8,000 people out of work. And all of that, I've seen it. It's sitting there rusting. They had roads built prior to a lot of this construction. And then when they stopped the border wall, the roads are still there. So the cartels are using the roads that have been built. This money was allocated by Congress. We are the ones in Congress that tell the executive order, the executive branch of our government, to enforce these rules and enforce the law. We make the law, not the executive branch. And he's supposed to enforce what we pass. This was a law that was passed. These are funds that were allocated for border barrier construction, and he has violated that law. And I'm hoping that we get a ruling that will force him to continue and resume the wall construction. Absolutely needs to be done. Walls work.
They do. We proved that for 2 or 3 years. And to your point about this administration just not observing the rule of law, our mutual friend, Mark Morgan, who knows a thing or two about the border, told me a few weeks ago that we have 270,000 tons of steel ballards sitting in storage facilities at the border, ready to be erected. We've got the money allocated to erect them. We've got the people who want to actually do the construction, but Joe Biden and Kamala Harris aren't going to do it. Well, Dr. Babin.
He's right.
Yeah, he is. I would love to keep asking you a bunch of questions. Our audience members have been real happy to send some questions in, but you're a busy guy. You're got a district work week ahead. And so we'll wrap up with a final question that I ask all of our guests, and that is take a step back. I know you pretty well, and so I know that you're an optimist, you're a great patriot, and that is, in spite of all of the challenges that this country has faced in the last year and a half, why did you wake up today optimistic about the future of America?
Well, because I'm a Christian. I believe in the goodness. I believe in the two greatest commandments that our Lord and Savior gave us, and that is to love God and to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And I think that that truth will prevail. I think that as long as we have good men and women out there that are going to tell the truth and try to communicate this to the American people, I think you're going to see a turning back of America to this country needs a revival. Let's put it like that. But I think you will see in the midterm elections, you're going to see a retaking of the House and the Senate on the federal level in the U.S. Congress. And in 24, I think we're going to see it. It may be a retaking of the White House by a Republican. I happen to be a great supporter of President Trump. I believe that his policies were very, very effective. He was the most pro-life president that I had ever seen. I think there's been some great things that were done during his administration. I think there were some great challenges as well. But I think that the Democratic Party has gone way too far. They pushed this envelope of socialism, of repression, of this of critical race theories, of really things that are just gone way over the line for the average American voter and an average American citizen. And the spending, the absolute unbelievable, it took us 200 years to spend the first $1 trillion and run up a national debt of $1 trillion. And here in just the last few months, we've run up an extra trillion to the point where we're now $28 trillion debt in this nation. And it's going to be tough for our kids and grandkids and great grandkids to pay back. And I would ask every one of you to just look at your history books and look at what happened to ancient Rome because of immigration. Look what happened to the great state of California, who gave us Ronald Reagan for 8 years in the White House. We will never have another, Republican come out of the state of California because of immigration. That's the biggest reason for that. People are leaving these blue states in droves to come to great states like Texas that has free enterprise, freedom of opportunity, and all of the things, security and safety, and our Second Amendment rights, our First Amendment rights that are being so badly trampled by the Marxist left, the hard left of this country. I'm optimistic we're going to see, Kevin, a great change in 22. And I think the American people need to just continue in prayer, continue passing the message from one to the next, and get this great revival started in our nation.
Well, Dr. Brian Babin, I couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Thanks for your service to this country, not just the people of your district, but for everyone in the United States. And I'll just say, of course, I share your optimism. I think one of the reasons that I'm optimistic, we're optimistic at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, is because we are winning the little skirmishes in the first 100 days of this administration. Make no mistake, of course, the onslaught from them is horrific. We're not going to win every battle. We're not going to win every skirmish, but we're winning enough to hold the line so that when we get to the fall of next year and the fall of 2024, that we're going to be able to save this country. We happen to think it starts with a proper understanding of federalism, which you have delivered very well, my friend. May the Lord continue to prosper the work of your hands. And for those of you who've tuned in, thanks for making this show possible. Have a great day, a great week, and we'll see you a week from today.
Thank you, Kevin.